Anyhow, I'm Mutt Tut. Go ahead and introduce yourself, boys.
I'm based Warlock main.
Kale.
And together we are bringing everybody the first episode of Our Cryptarchs, a Destiny podcast. And we're starting from basically the very beginning. And we're going to kind of go from there. Since the very beginning kind of involves the Books of Sorrow and a metric shitload of Hive and a billion other stories. Yeah,
We're basically starting as early as we can. That's not pre the universe.
Yeah. But yeah, so Books of Sorrow and the story of Oryx, Zivu-Arath, and good old Savathun.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully, I know both of you have been doing your readings. God knows I've done too much of it. But yeah, so I guess it all starts good old Proto Hive, and
it all starts with that unnamed planet.
Unnamed planet that we eventually find the name of in a Stormjoy.
Well, the unnamed planet that the Krill, which were the Hive before they were the Hive, lived on, crashed into Fundament, which we all know Fundament, where the Hive became the Hive. And when the planet crashed into Fundament, all of the crust of the planet became sort of the continents on top of Fundament's ocean.
Yes, the floating land.
Right. And then all of the different species that have their planets have crashed into Fundament over the years because it's apparently just gigantic. They're all kind of scattered all over those many continents all over the oceans.
I mean, shit, it's so big it has, 52 fucking moons? So definitely rivals
52.
Some of our planets in our solar system.
Yeah, because didn't we look it up the other day? How many did Jupiter have? Wasn't it like 51?
I think Jupiter has a bunch. Jupiter has
53.
Yeah, 52 plus 1. So
yeah.
So I think kind of getting into that and getting into the basic beginnings of the proto hive or the krill. Pretty much for what we can tell, most, if not all, of the different species on Fundament were from other crashed planets. So the sense of gravity from the absolute size of this planet has got to be ridiculous. And having 52 moons, just kind of plays into that, scientifically, I guess. But Fundament is basically a gas giant. And as they said a moment ago, pretty much the only landmass are just the rubble from other planets or moons crashing to the surface.
Right.
Kind of just want to take a minute and paint a picture of Fundament, right? So Fundament, being a gas giant, has sort of a ocean-like surface to it, other than the continents.
Not trying to cut you off, but I like to think of Fundament being in the same vein as Neptune, because gas giant.
Yeah. I think one really good way to think about it that a lot of people would be really familiar with is Camino in Star Wars. Not with the same level of technology and stuff that they had, but those raging oceans all the time. That's kind of what I envision. And based on what we've seen from the trailers, that's sort of what it is. Because we have seen Fundament in the Witch Queen trailers a couple times.
Right. So one thing to keep in mind is just how how dangerous this place is to start with, right? The oceans are all toxic. There's acid rain, and you have the storm joys, which are just predators basically that look like clouds. And so, where the species or all the different species that live on Fundament, it's just, I'm just trying to think of the best way to present that, because how dangerous a place it was for everything, especially the proto hive.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
it was a
I don't,
hellscape, basically.
yeah, because I mean, you go outside, the flesh will melt off your bones if it's raining. If you go in the water, you know, you get poisoned. If you go out when there's clouds outside, you get eaten. So it's just a nightmare of a place
Mhm.
to be.
Yeah, they were lucky to live longer than 10 fundament years, which we don't really have like a scale for how that translates to Earth years. We're just led to believe that it's still pretty short. So,
Not said anywhere in books how long the year would be.
It just gives us the rough estimate is 10 years, whether that's
Mhm.
10 us years, whether it was translated to where, or the books of sorrow were written to where we would understand what their 10 years was, or, whatever. But that's the roughly 10 years is about the best we got on the average lifespan of
Yeah.
Proto Hive,
And
unless it's one of the mothers.
if we wanted to take a guess and try to compare it to a similar planet like Jupiter, because I assume they're roughly the same size. I mean, obviously the distance factors into it, but Jupiter's orbital period is 12 years, 12 Earth years. So it could be similar to that. It could be more. It could be less. We don't really have any way to actually know.
I kind of think of it more of like, because they're like a parasitic kind of like insect like races protohive. They all are born en masse and then die relatively quickly. I think that the orbital would be pretty decently quick.
Mm-hmm.
Their galaxy, solar system, but we don't know. We never will. Maybe.
Yeah, unless we go there,
Yeah,
which would be cool.
would be, but guess we'll have to wait and see. But
God, could you imagine the day Fundament shows up on the director?
oh my
Oh,
gosh. But kind of moving on from like setting the scene for Fundament. I guess the main story of the Hive kind of revolve around the three sisters of the Osmium King. That'd be, is it Alrash?
Alrash,
Alresh,
Strathona, and
Zero.
Zero.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
three are the three surviving daughters of Osmium. Don't
His
know how
only
many.
children, by the way.
We don't know how died prior or
Well, we know that there was a ton originally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because who was it? Talking about,
Zero says the helium drinker ambassador
yeah.
ate 10 of my sister's tribute.
Yeah, so I mean, we know that Hive basically spawn in swarms,
Yeah,
from
it's
the
like
different,
bees.
yeah. Uh, no matter where you go, there's always, 1,000 thrall on the moon. Moon's haunted. Um, and so, I mean, they're just countless. So you can only imagine how many siblings they would have had. But I mean, that's neither here nor there, I guess, because the rest of them don't matter.
Yeah.
It's Alros, Sathona, and Zero
If they
are
mattered,
the
we'd
big
know about them.
bads.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And we probably would have killed them. But
So I guess as far as the sisters go, I guess you start with them chronologically from oldest to youngest. Like we said a minute ago, there's three of them total. There's Arash, which is the oldest. Um, Sathona's the middle child, and Zero is the youngest. So, what was I going to say?
Zero's want is to be a knight to fight the helium drinkers, Sathona's wishes is to eat the jelly, quotes, to become a mother, to be able to live longer. Alrash wants to explore. So that's
Yeah,
like each of their carnal desires.
yeah, and that's where I was going. Thank you.
Which will be very important momentarily.
Right. So, if you got to sit back and think about it, and you look at it from, I guess, a little bit more than their, I guess, more of a human-like standpoint, that's kind of their dreams, right? You know, I guess, Arash, the navigator, who dreams of the infinite ocean. To me, I think about like an old school RPG character. Like their dream is to be an adventurer, go out and exploring and stuff. And
Yeah.
living my best life kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like you can almost kind of picture Oryx like on Fundament, just like looking up like at the sky, and he's just like, or well, rather in this case, she is just amazed and just
Right.
wants to see what's out there.
Yeah, and Sathona, I mean, wants to eat the jelly and become a mother to live longer. That just goes to show, I don't think anybody wants, you know, a short-term life. Um, I understand there's some situations that are different, but she wants to eat the jelly to become a mother to have a long life. So she's scared. I
Yeah,
mean, that's all that boils down to. She's scared, just like some of us may be scared of the dark or basset hounds.
or Screams.
Screams.
Dreams.
To each their own. And Zero wants to be a knight. I remember when I was a kid, I used to, which I've always been caught up in like the fantasy scheme and stuff. And I remember when I was like 12, I wanted a suit of armor so bad I couldn't stand it.
Mm-hmm.
Just to actually be the knight. And I think every guy who's honest is going to say, yeah, we thought about that. I
Yeah,
mean,
something like that at some point, whether it's a
yeah,
suit of armor or Jedi robes or a Boba Fett suit. Like everyone has like that thing. It's like I want to be that warrior.
The fantasy of protecting others and the like adventure.
Yeah.
yeah. So when you cut kind of like when you are looking at it just from that standpoint, you don't know that these characters are insect like creatures with their chattering and whatnot, and know what they turn into later and what happens. You just take a minute and think about that. You have three sisters who are scared, but they want that adventure. They want to be able to protect what's dear to them. Just try looking at it from a little more humane standpoint, sort of.
Yeah,
And
and when you no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just going back through and reading that. Yeah, I've never paid attention to it because I've always thought, oh, Hive bad, point gun, left click. That's how I've always looked at them. But I don't know, when you kind of look at it from a different perspective, I think it makes for a more interesting story.
Yeah, and the way that honestly, you can pin the entire existence and darkness and everything that we know about the Hive now on one person from Fundament, and that's Teox. You can basically blame everything that has happened to them from that point on Teox. Because without Teox, they all probably just die in the God Wave, and that's it. We never get Oryx. We never get Savathun. But
Yeah, so
because of Teox, and we can talk about that a little more. But
also, speaking of Teox, the fact that that fucking bitch somehow lived for so long as and being frozen with the Ammonites and shit is just absolutely crazy. And just, I know it's like for sake of story, but like just the fact that we have a proto-hive still alive when it's Oryx, Savathun, and Zivu Harath, it's like that's a long time. That's past.
Well, you got to
Yeah.
think too, and for those of you who may not necessarily know who Teox is, Teox was one of the mothers per se.
Of the helium
She
drink. Not
was she was
yes.
she with the well, I know she like after she basically turned against the Osmium Court, she like ran to the helium drinkers. Was she helium drinker prior?
Okay, I lied. So
She was part
she
of the
was
Osmium Court. She
she
was
was the
basically the
osmium mother.
teacher. She
Yes.
was the teacher for Zero Sathona and Arash. She was like a sterile mother,
So she's
and
pretty much a nanny,
yeah, she was
Yeah.
basically a nanny for
royal
for the
nanny.
three sisters. Yeah, she was basically the royal nanny.
But she
And
betrays the osmium court and gets the helium drinkers to invade and kill the king.
mhm,
And that is where Aox's kind of story starts with
right.
everybody else.
And to add
We
a little context to that, the reason she gets the helium drinkers to invade in the first place is because the king, the Osmium King, who he doesn't have a name, he's just called the Osmium King, was going crazy over the prospect of the God Wave,
Which
which was a massive wave that would come and just it would basically just destroy all life on Fundament as they know it.
yes,
so
he
And the
also is 10 years old as a
mhm,
not mother, which for Proto Hive and just Hive as a whole, that's extremely old. So
mhm,
old age plus going insane over this God wave doesn't help at all. It definitely makes him seem and sound much more not lucid is the best probably the
right,
best way to put
yeah,
it.
so did
and
we do real quick? Do
yeah,
I don't I don't know if we said it, but did we go over like the Osmium Court and the Helium Drinkers that there's two basically factions of Proto Hive, or did I
That we
get us
know
way off
of.
track?
Uh
Um,
there
no, I
were
don't think we
more,
did.
but those are the important ones
So
so
yeah, you want to go
TL
over it, Cal?
because there were
actually,
over 500 species on Fundament.
so basically a TLDR. There are two that we know of, two courts or kingdoms or clans or factions basically of
Pretty
the
much
Proto Hive
whatever
on
you want to
Fundament.
call it.
Right.
Mhm,
Um, one of those is the Osmium Court, which is the one that has the Osmium King, Arash, Sathona, and Zero. The other is the Helium Drinkers. And these two,
Well,
um,
before you continue, they're called the helium drinkers by the osmium court. It's the helium court
right.
otherwise. So that's that it's like what, like a slang term, I guess, for them that the
yeah, I
Yeah.
guess
osmium
so.
court uses.
Yeah. So you had the Osmium Court and the Helium Court. And from my understanding, they've pretty much been sort of in conflict for a long time. And then it just was pushed over the edge when Teox, which was the teacher to uh, Alrosh, Sathona, and Zero, basically ratted the king out because he was going crazy. So
Mhm,
she was she wrote a letter to the Helium Court and essentially said, "Hey, this dude's crazy. I'm worried about my place in life. Come take over and like put me in as your regent," which is kind of a typical like command and conquer style movie thing. Like you've seen it 100 times in different movies, I'm sure.
yeah,
So just kind of painting that so where we know why Teox did what Teox did and how it started the next series of events per se.
right. And another part of her motive in that of having the helium drinkers come in and get rid of the Osmium King and install her as the leader was also that she didn't think that the sisters were ready yet. Because at that point they were only, I think, 2 years old.
Yep, 2 years
Yeah.
old.
And Teox didn't think the king was fit to rule anymore, and didn't think that the sisters were strong enough to take over for him. So obviously she thought she was the best choice.
Right. What was it? What was it? Teok said in that letter.
Soon the Osmium
Our-
King will lock himself in the royal orrery to study the moon. Clear your nights, O helium drinkers, and invade our continent. Kill the 3 heirs. I will rule the Osmium court as your regent and build engines for you.
There you go.
What was it? What was it? She was saying about
The
she
sisters,
gave a reason why these sisters each specifically couldn't rule
Yes.
because like Alrosh would be distracted by
she
adventure or whatever.
basically just cites their wants and their dreams, as you called it. She just says Zero, the youngest and bravest, wants to be a knight. Sathona, most clever, wants to be a mother. Alrash, navigator, who dreams of the infinite ocean. And then she goes, none of these are suitable heirs. None of them will protect the Osmium court from the Howling Fundament. Zero can fight but not lead. Sathona can think but not fight. And Alrash's curiosity will draw her away from duty. So
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, she just bases it off of what their dreams and wants are and just says, they're children. No. And then
Yeah. But the other thing is because she was so close to them, obviously they're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like she must know what she's talking about.
And then from that, the helium
from
drinkers
there
invade, kill the Osmium King, but Aurash, Zero, and Sathona at this point in time witness their father get killed by the helium drinkers and also see that Teox is basically behind this whole plan. And Aurash and Zero and Sathona become extremely pissed off. And they flee. So they leave the Osmium court and whatever continent they're on? Question mark. We don't really
and they
know
go
a whole lot.
Yeah, all we know is that basically they leave and they sail the Fundament Oceans for like a year.
Yeah.
Until the next important thing happens.
And then
in this meantime as well, we've talked about the Osmium King and his age and how essentially he was just going mad. At one point during this time, I guess something that helped kind of accelerate the madness, the Osmium King was basically taking a walk down the beach, and he came across a worm. It looks kind of like a larva or a grub, basically, but it's kind of big. It's like a small dog. But it was a little white worm that he had come across. And I don't know if it actually did anything as far as like talk to him or basically whisper in his mind, similar to how, the Ahamkara have done. Like if you ever inspect some of the Ahamkara armor and it refers to you while you're wearing it, like, or
oh, wear mine.
Yeah. Oh, bear mine.
Oh, bear mine. That sort of stuff. So that is one important thing to keep in mind too, is that the Osmium King did possess this worm that at the time of the assassination and conquering of the Osmium Court by the Helium Court, Sathona took a moment. I believe it was Sathona.
Yes.
Took a moment and basically grabbed the worm because it was something that her father had essentially clung to since the moment he found it. And that is kind of a chunky portion of what's leading to what they're going to do.
Yeah, because the worm, or I think as they call it in the actual books of Sorrow, they call it the familiar. The familiar basically so let me rewind a little bit. They're sailing the ocean for a year. They come across basically a ship, and I think they call it the Needle, right? Isn't that what they call it?
Yes.
Yeah, so they come across a ship called the Needle. Zero wants to sell it. Arash wants to keep it and use it to explore the oceans. Sathona agrees with Arash. They take the ship and they plunge into Fundament's oceans.
But why does Sathona agree with Aurash?
Because the worm tells her, or the familiar tells her, that they need to go deeper into the ocean. They need to go find something in the ocean.
The worm that talks to Sathona, which we can assume most likely talked to the Osmium King, helping him go into madness. Now, the middle daughter has it. The oldest daughter at 2-1. They keep the ship, and now we're going to go exploring because Alrash, the navigator. Zero wanted to sell it, as you said, but to get a mercenary army to take back the Osmium court. And Alrash Sathona kind of see that as like a very short term kind of like goal that isn't like suitable and good enough for like the long term of their race.
Yeah. So Zero's main reason for wanting to sell the ship and get a mercenary army was mainly the fact that, it was a pretty short-sighted goal. She wants to go and, avenge the Osmium court, save her people, get revenge on Teox, because like we said earlier, she wants to be a knight. That's who she is. She wants to sort of fight for the greater good and help people, save people. So that's why she wanted to sell it and get this mercenary army.
Like the paladin in every fantasy story.
Yeah, exactly.
The good and holy. And then, so that was Zero, the youngest. Then we have Alrash, the navigator, as she's been called, wanting to use the needle to explore the fundament oceans to make sure that whatever, see if there's anything useful in there, or just honestly, probably just to fucking explore, because Alrash, the navigator.
Yep.
There's not really a whole like solid reason to why Alrash is like, let's just go down. So it's just let's just go, and everybody. Yeah. That one's just kind of there.
Yeah, and so at this point they're tied 1-1 on the vote, and Sathona is their tiebreaker, and their father's familiar, which, as we mentioned earlier, Savathun is kind of taking care of. The familiar whispers to her, basically, and tells her to agree with Alrash that they need to go deeper into the oceans because there's something important there that they need to find. It's a little more cryptic than that, we're led to believe, but that's the reasoning. So because the familiar says that to Sathona agrees with Alrash, and then Zero cuts her losses. They all get in the ship, and into the ocean they go.
And Sathona also tells Zero that the ship is worthless. So it's basically like a 2.5 to what to the original 1. So
right.
It's more trying to get Zero as well by cunning lies and whatnot to kind of just agree and go with the plan of diving down into the fundament oceans.
Right.
So now the three sisters are in quotes in agreement, and now they're gonna use the ship they found called the Needle, and they're gonna use that, and they're gonna explore the fundament oceans.
And we don't really have any kind of time frame or anything before the next important thing happens. We don't know if they went in the water and this happened immediately. We don't know if they were there for a couple days, a couple weeks. We don't really know how long they were down there. But eventually, while they were in the oceans, they ran into this creature in the water called the Leviathan. And no, it's not Callus's Leviathan. This is an actual living thing. And we're also led to believe that the Leviathan is a sort of disciple of the Traveler. And as we mentioned earlier, the Traveler is around Fundament on one of the moons, helping out a different species. But they go and they run into the Leviathan, and the Leviathan basically warns them that they can continue deeper or fall to darkness. Basically, that this is the point in their story where they can make the choice between the light or the dark. It's not exactly phrased that way, but this is a very important point for them at this point in their story, because this is basically where they get to choose which path they're going to walk. If they're going to go with the light or they're going to go with the darkness.
It's the point of no return.
Exactly.
And also a super heavy TLDR for that whole encounter with the Leviathan. Very paraphrased.
Because it's a pretty lengthy conversation, isn't it?
It's a few books, yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's a few verses out of the first book.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they base a decision off of what the Leviathan tells them, that the sky is in reference to the light and the traveler, and being, having that power of the traveler and the good. And then it's referenced as the deep, known as the darkness, is the opposite, the other side of the coin for them. So this is their chance, as Kale said, the point of no return, to either go on the side of the traveler and have that, or continue on and commune with the deep.
One thing to look at right here as well, the Leviathan, had this monstrous beast, right? Is giving them basically a choice: keep going or turn back. Well, looking at it from them, like, they probably felt like they didn't really have a choice, right? Because if they went back, they had no home to go back to, unless it was just the three of them trying to conquer the helium court that's overtaken the osmium court. It's not like the traveler was going to bestow upon the three sisters the the powers or ability that guardians have in the light or anything like that. And for all they know, or for all we know, their father was raving about the God Wave, and the traveler was kind of part of that. So at that point, they were like, they could have very well been like, well, that's no brainer. If I go back, we're getting gypped. We don't get our homes back. We're weak. We're powerless. But if we keep going, maybe we'll find something that can help.
Right. And the fact that something is there warning them not to was probably even a little bit more of an encouragement, because it was basically, their choice was basically turn around to nothing and die to the God Wave, or ignore what this guy in the water is saying, and maybe there's something good down there that we can use.
Well, let's see, I think this is Zero's. Yes, this is what after Auresh protests originally. The Leviathan says, I reject the deep claim. You will turn back, sweet krill of hope. You will choose the sky instead. And Zero says in return, you are huge and old. Same. Our lives are short and desperate. If it's the way the world's supposed to be, I won't have it. People like Taox are supposed to win. I won't let them. I'll beat the world until it changes. I'll kill everything in the way. So Zero is probably, out of the three of the sisters, probably the most in line with the darkness / deep like ideologies of, if the world's the way it is now, I want it to change. God damn it, I'm killing everybody. So Zero has that belief, and then the Leviathan continues on, and the deep embraces death, saying this is inevitable and right. I exist as hungry ruin. Turn back from the world-killing way, or you will live as death and devastation, which is super heavy foreshadowing to everything that is Hive.
Yeah.
So Leviathan definitely called that out really well. The sky is the harder way, but it is kinder. My charge is balanced, my voice exhausted. And then Sathona has a protest, and that's the end of their conversation with this giant beast.
So essentially, they're on the sisters are on the path of revenge, right? You know, uh, they want to take back what's rightfully theirs, quote unquote. And they looked at the Leviathan and they said, "Okay, boomer," and just kept going.
Basically, yes.
That's basically what happened. But I think it's also important to mention that at this point, again, the familiar gets involved and tells Sathona, ignore him, go deeper, basically. Because she says in those pages that like the worm is telling them to go deeper. What is it she says exactly? Sisters, I have fit my father's familiar. Look, it answers me in plain words. It helped me find this ship. It gives me strength when hope is lost. So she's basically saying, we have no reason to listen to this guy, but the worm helped us find the ship. So let's listen to the worm.
And so they did.
And they continued down into the deep, past the Leviathan, and they meet wonderful thing.
A wonderful group of things.
But the first one they talk to is called Yule. It's the honest worm. So they get down into the deep, and they are graded by. Honestly, they're probably the best way to describe them is gigantic worms, huge, massive worms that have godlike powers and talk to them is another thing. And they're met with the first one called Yule, Yul, introduces himself as the honest worm to them and offers them a deal. All three.
Yeah, so to put these worms kind of in context, if any of you or anybody listening has played Destiny prior to this, back in the Warmind expansion, we had a strike. I cannot remember what the strike's called.
Will of the Thousands.
Yeah. And the boss of that was a worm, which we're about to get a little bit more into the worms specifically. But in that strike, we saw Yule, which is the Will of Thousands.
Zol.
No, Zol, Will of Thousands.
Is that what I say?
No,
You said Yule.
Oh, I meant Zul. My bad. Or
Zol,
Zol.
yeah.
That can be fixed. Anyway, so they run into Zol you run into Zol Will of Thousands, and that kind of gives you a mental image of how big the worms are,
right?
Essentially, and Zol was the runt of the litter.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Zol in that strike, Zol is. Think about the fact that Zol is so massive in that strike, and we're really only seeing part of him. We're not even seeing all of him. And he's the smallest one. So,
I guess
these things are massive.
I'm trying to think of for any American listeners, it's the equivalent of probably, I don't know, 6 football fields is probably a good estimate for Zol alone.
Probably. Yeah, probably about.
And all the other ones, I don't know. You're probably
bigger.
Close, way bigger than that. So that's big.
Yeah. And so with the worm gods, do you want me to go ahead and just give you all the names for the worm gods? Because there's 5 of them.
So you should. There's as you said, 5.
Yeah, so there's 5 worm gods. There's Yule, the honest worm that we already mentioned.
The first one they met.
Yep. And then Zol, Will of the Thousands, as Kale mentioned, we fought him on Mars. And then the 3 others are Eir, E-I-R, the Keeper of Order. Or I don't really know how you're supposed to say it, but it's just you are. Yeah, the Everhunger. And then finally, arguably the most important one, Akka, Worm of Secrets. And Akka will be very important later.
And especially to Alrash's story. So
yes,
they meet the 5 worms. Yule offers them a deal. And the deal is basically they've been in the deep. All the worms have been in the deep waiting for, these 3 sisters. And now that they're here, he's offering them, you guys didn't go with the traveler in the light. You guys are choosing the darkness. So, in order for immortality and immense power, we just need you to have a symbiotic relationship with the worms. So the worm gods give the proto hive, the krill, the 3 sisters, a bunch of these larvae, I guess is the best way to put
they're
it.
larvae. Yeah,
They like live in their body and they don't like eat real substance. It's kind of
Yeah,
hard to describe
destruction.
it. Yeah,
it's kind of like they feed off of
death.
like ideology almost, at least with their specific worms, because
It's just your
the worms that
philosophy
they have are
101s
different.
as a worm. That's all it is. Just,
Yeah,
just professor here.
right.
So they feed off of ideology. I'm gonna take that.
I
That's
guess
a good
that's the
way.
best way to explain it.
We want to
And
help you, princes. We offer each of you a bargain. Is a symbiosis. Is that
into your
pronounced right?
bodies, our children, our newborn larvae. From then you shall obtain eternal life. From them you shall gain power over your own fragile flesh, the power to make it as you will. And should you find an imperfection or injustice or an inconvenience, you have the power to repair it. So, yeah, it's like, hey, here's some giant worm. Honestly, it's just a giant god at this point to them. And it's just like, hey, you can be as powerful as me by having this worm that is my child in you. And the sisters are like, hell yeah, that sounds like a plan. Immortality. And they accept it. And this begins the story of the Hive.
Yeah, so at that point, to re-summarize yet again, the 3 sisters make the dive, and they disregard the Leviathan's warning, I suppose, or the Leviathan's suggestion, and they keep diving deeper. They run into Yule, the honest worm, and he's the one who's like, "Hey, come down here. Got my boys I want you to meet. Get down there." And they offer them a deal they really can't refuse, basically, right? They're
Yeah.
handed everything they wanted on a silver platter. It's like a spur of the moment offer. Like, take this, you'll have what you want, you know, and more. But and you just sign right here and don't read the details.
It's like 7 pages of like super small text that.
Yeah, 7 pages of 1-point font.
Yeah. And it will definitely come back to bite them in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, they accepted the bargain. And that turns them from the proto hive or the krill into the hive that we know now, for the most part.
The first like generation.
Right.
Yeah.
So should we talk about which sister made which deal?
I was about to say that's arguably the most important part of this thing is this is where they become more of what we know them as right now.
We'll save Alrash for last because that one's probably the most complicated out of the 3.
Right.
So this is going to be where Alrash, Sathona, and Zero essentially become the hive gods we mostly know them as in the world of Destiny now.
Sathona accepts the deal for immortality like all the others, but her eternal carnal desire of trickery and cunning and just like deceit, she has to always be. This is like the fine print to her deal is she has to
She has to always be scheming, for lack of a better word.
To like always be coming up with some plan to like backstab someone of just
Sabotage.
Yeah,
just always.
she's always got to be scheming and deceiving and have her hands in a million different things, just always messing things up, basically.
Ignorance. Her worm feeds off of deception and ignorance, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. And then Zero, the youngest, the one that wants to grow up to be a knight and to fight, and the carnal desire for her to be a fighter. She becomes in quotes the strongest of the three, and she has
in
to
heavy quotes.
in heavy quotes, and we will get into that later. But she becomes the strongest of the three. In her worm's fine print is she has to constantly be fighting and like becoming stronger through war or just some kind of like martial combat. So that's hers in because Sathona, now Savathun, taking the worm becomes Savathun. Zero turns into Zivu Arath. And that now you have those two names that everybody should be familiar with if you played the game.
Yeah.
And
also those two at this point are essentially what we know in game right now. They don't have much changed about them later on or like get new powers or anything, excluding what's happening in Witch Queen. What they are at this point is essentially what their power is right now in the game.
Yeah, it's been the stuff we've known for the past 7. So they haven't changed. Now, the third sister, the oldest, the navigator, Auresh, as we currently know her, accepts her deal, and her fine print to it is you have to constantly be exploring, navigating, questioning everything. You can never just go, well, I don't understand, and then just give up. She has to keep trying to understand it, whatever it may be.
And wasn't conquering part of her deal as well?
Yeah.
Conquest. Yeah. Hers is the most like.
She has a lot of fine print.
It's probably the worst.
The others had 7 pages. She has like 30.
Her deal is not very good. But
yes,
in a very confusing naming scheme, she goes from Aurash to Aurix. Not Oryx, Aurix.
Auryx.
Because naming is great for the Hive.
And at this point, also, that's important to note, when Aurash becomes Oryx, they change from being female to being male. So at this point, Aurix/Aurash is now male.
And the other two are still female.
Yes.
That's where we're at in the story.
Yes.
So we got
their collective stipulation for everything was, those natures or ideologies that we named that they have to keep feeding. They have to keep feeding their worm with those things. Otherwise, the worm will consume them and they'll die, and that's it.
Yeah, the worm literally eats them.
Yeah.
They die. So they have to, in Zivu Arath's, has to keep conquest and war and fighting, and Savathun's scheming, cunningness, deceit, and Aurix's
conquest
Aurix.
and exploring and navigating and the million different things that he has to do now.
Yeah. Now you got 3 siblings that are in quote hive gods. They're immortal. They can't die from age. And then eventually they learn how to do other things with that.
The operative phrase in that sentence being from age. We'll come back to that.
All right, this is going to be a long podcast. So for everybody listening, hi. The Hive is lengthy.
grab a drink, get a snack, buckle in. We're going to be here a while. So after all of that happens with the worm gods, the name changes, the new powers, the worms, everything, the first thing the sisters, or well, the brother and the sisters do,
siblings. The
siblings. First thing the siblings do, I gotta adjust now because we said sisters for the past 30 minutes. They go home and they, for lack of a better word, genocide the helium drinkers. Just completely slaughter them. And
yeah, like not a single
I mean,
helium drinker left, and on the entirety of Fundament kind of thing.
Yeah. And in the course of all that happening, Teox runs away. She gets away. They're not able to get to Teox. And she runs away and hides with the Ammonites, which is the Fundament-esque species that is, blessed by the Traveler right now.
And
so she goes and hides with them.
Ammonites are not on Fundament per se. They're
on one of the moons of Fundament, right? Yeah.
Yes. And this is that we are still before the God Wave in the timeline. Like it hasn't happened yet, but we're getting to that soon. PM.
Right. And then what's the next most important thing that happens after the helium drinkers are, wiped off of existence?
The sisters start gearing up for war. And they kind of take their entire Hive armies. Savathun being, I guess, the mother morph is what the real term is for her change. Starts building up her coven for her Hive army. And then Aurex and Xivu Arath start building up their army to go after the Ammonites and specifically Teox. So yeah, they start building up an army, and they're like Teox in particular, fuck you, and then they go after that.
And in the course of building their armies, they essentially tell all of the proto Hive, as they basically have a choice. They can take the worms, like the sisters did, or they can die. Those are their options. They take the worm or they die.
And I believe the death that they were offered was getting eaten by another Hive that ate the worm. So yeah, it was a little dark.
A little dark, but pretty clear cut decision, if you ask me.
So most of their osmium court that they regained takes the worm over death.
Yeah. And then the Hive turn their focus, because at this point they rule Fundament. At this point there's no one on Fundament but the Hive. Because after they liberated the Osmium Court, Teox and all the other species, everyone is either dead or fleed. That's not Hive.
Yeah, the other 511 species on Fundament pretty much get wiped off by the Hive. And then
they're all either dead or they run.
And then the Hive take one of their technologies of space travel, and the story continues with now the Hive can leave Fundament. And they do.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah. So you got these massive armies led by 3 gods that, and all of these the whole Hive army also worships the worm gods in addition to Aurex, Xivu Arath, and Savathun. So now you got like hardcore belief into worm gods, which makes them stronger, and it makes the 3 siblings stronger, and now they have space travel. We're going to go from Fundament that they completely either wiped off all those other species or they ran, as Space said, and now we're going to go find Teox up in the Ammonite planet or moon of Fundament.
Yep.
And yeah, no, they go up there, and the Ammonites are blessed by the Traveler, as has been said a few times now. Yeah, that doesn't help them a whole lot. And,
Well, actually, there's some stuff before. Because with the Ammonites, Auryx initially wanted to negotiate with them. The worm gods did not like that very much.
yes.
So they pressured Savathun into killing Auryx for essentially for not wanting to go to war and not wanting to like prove that they're stronger. And because of the way that now they're essentially gods and all that works, even though Savathun killed him, he's not actually dead. He just goes to the Ascendant Realm until he's strong enough to come back to our dimension.
Which is a pocket realm, pocket dimension that lives outside of normal, honestly, outside of normal everything.
Reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like it's a separate dimension, essentially.
Yeah, and only powerful Hive that have lots of killing and death underneath their belt have access and their own key to the Ascendant Realm. So not you got the siblings and a few others at this point, but not a whole lot.
And that's why at this point, as far as in-game storytelling and content is concerned, we've only been to 2 Hive Throne worlds, soon to be 3. We've been to Crota's, we've been to Oryx's, and we're about to go to Savathun's. But no one else.
Did we not go
fought.
to what was that one kid that Oryx didn't like?
Nokris?
Yeah, didn't we go to his assignment Ascendant Realm?
I don't think
back in season.
I don't know that his was the Arrivals. I know what you're talking about. I don't think it was his throne world. I think we just killed him in the Ascendant Realm, which that's how you kill Ascendant Hive. They don't necessarily have to have a throne world to go back to the Ascendant Realm, but like for Nokris, he wasn't powerful enough to have his own throne world, but he still went back to the Ascendant Realm because that's just what happens with Ascendant Hive. But anyway, getting back on track with the siblings. Once Oryx comes back, he is not the same Auryx that left. He is merciless. He is bloodthirsty. He is a tyrant. And because of that, Auryx leads the Hive against the Ammonites, and the Hive eradicate them. Just completely, just everyone's slaughtered. Same thing as the helium drinkers. And they didn't stop there. They also killed the Leviathan in the Oceans of Fundament. And after all of this, that forced Teox and the Traveler to flee the system. And after that, I don't think we know exactly where the Traveler went next. I don't know about Teox either, but you read it, you might know better than me.
Teox went and her surviving refusalists flee towards Kahar Atoll. We don't know where that is. We don't know what that is. We just know that she went, and a bunch of her little, I guess, the remnants of helium drinkers and osmium court. I guess the equivalent to like
just like a cell of people that are still loyal to her,
I guess. And then that's all that's left of that group. And Kahar Atoll, we don't know where that is.
We don't know where it is. We don't know what it is. We don't know if it's a city, a planet, a galaxy. We have no idea.
But that's where they went. And then in the current story, since all the Hive now have left Fundament itself, and there's not really a whole lot left alive on the planet,
they're pretty much done with Fundament.
Yeah. And
yeah, I mean, at this point in the story, this is basically it for Fundament.
yeah, they're
We
pretty
don't
much
really
move
see
on
it
from that.
again.
They move on from Fundament and continue with the internal conquests and conquering systems upon systems, and as the worm gods kind of command them, that anybody that doesn't believe in the ideology of the deep, they're bad. They're in the whole, if there's an inconvenience, you can repair it with your power. And the Hive kind of see everything else that's not Hive as inconvenience, so everything else pretty much dies.
Yeah,
Like,
it's basically a crusade.
yeah, it's a massive crusade, spearheaded
And
by Aurix at this point.
yeah, and also while all of that other stuff is going on, the siblings would actually often go to war with each other in order to feed their worms and also to increase their power in the sword logic, which, if we want to just go on a little tangent about the sword logic, it's not super complicated, but
The
it's
sword
basically kill or
logic
be killed.
is the whole belief for the Hive. It's their soul. It's like their sole belief system on how to
Exist in the
yeah,
universe,
it's how to
basically.
live. And as Space said, it's kill or be killed, but there's a little bit more than that. It's
Yeah.
the more you kill and the ways you die teach you on how to basically be a better fighter and to be a better warrior. And the more you kill, the more power you have in the sword logic.
And another thing that is very important is the stronger the enemy you kill, that also, increases your own strength.
Like if someone, it's like winning in a casino, like, and you're betting against people, and that someone has like 1,000,000 chips and you have like 3, and you beat the person with the 1,000,000 chips and they bet all in, and you now have their 1,000,000 chips. Like, that's the equivalent to it.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're dead. Like,
Yup.
that's the 101 on the sword logic. That is what the Hive believe in since Alric, Savathun, and Zevoroth came back and took back over the Osmium Court. That's kind of what has come and sprung up, within the species, from their, I guess, their warring and conquest. That's the belief that has come to be.
And the light has its own form of thing called bomb logic, which we won't get into because it's a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
We could probably do a full episode just about bomb logic because there's so much. But there is the sword logic for the dark, the bomb logic for the light. And we can just, leave it there for now because the bomb logic is very complicated and I still don't fully understand it.
Same. But now, at this point in the story, the conquest begins for Alric, Savathun, and Zevoroth, and they're going throughout the entire galaxy and pretty much just killing everything they find. So that's going to be it for episode 1. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This will hopefully be out after Witch Queen comes out, and everybody that's been playing it, hope you enjoy it. Hopefully we can continue on with some more lovely discussions about the Hive. The next one.
We absolutely will.
Oh yes. Any closing remarks, anybody?
Just that Witch Queen is about to be a hell of a lot of fun, and I can't wait.
Yes, sir.
Hey,